Today I want to talk to y'all a little bit about why you can't gain confidence. So a lot of people out there will struggle to gain confidence. And there will even be people out there who will sort of give them lots of solutions, right? So you'll have people like dating coaches who'll be like, yeah, if you want to gain confidence, you got to get out there, right? You got to ask out a bunch of women or men or whatever. And the more that you do it, the more confidence you'll gain. I want to take a moment to thank our HG coaches. I've taught at a lot of different places and worked with a lot of different people. And honestly, our coaches are some of the best people I've ever worked with. HG coaches have helped over 10,000 people find purpose, direction, and improve their mental health. After about 20 weeks of coaching, the average client experiences a 58% improvement in sense of purpose in life, a 45% improvement in feelings of anxiety, and even a 35% reduction in feelings of despair. And this isn't just me saying this. At this point, we've done this for 3 years, run 6 research studies, and even presented our findings at the American Psychiatric Association National Conference. Over 100,000 sessions later, I can confidently say this works. So if you're interested in checking out HG coaching for yourself, go to HealthyGamerGG/coaching to learn more. But sometimes that's not actually our experience, right? Like we go out there, we ask out a bunch of women, we get rejected a lot. And somehow like with each rejection, our confidence doesn't build. It kind of starts to crater more and more and more. And so then we're kind of left with this sort of idea like, okay, what am I supposed to do to gain confidence? Because a lot of people out there are saying, oh yeah, just get out there and you'll get more confident. You got to practice, right? And there'll be a lot of people out there who will say, yeah, it worked for me. This is how I gained confidence. And you just got to keep at it, bro. You got to keep at it, right? Practice makes perfect. But sometimes it doesn't seem to work. And I completely understand why it doesn't seem to work, because bizarrely, you can't actually gain confidence. I would almost go as far as saying it's impossible to gain confidence. And that may sound really bizarre, but hear me out. So the reason you can't gain confidence is because confidence is actually the default state. What you gain over time is insecurity. So the problem with gaining confidence is that we're all trying to get something when actually what we need to do is let something go. The solution to quote unquote getting back to confidence or being confident isn't to gain confidence, it's to unlearn insecurity. So let me explain what I mean. So if you think about it, like think about a child. A child's default state is actually confidence, right? Like if you look at like a 2-year-old, like 2-year-olds don't have insecurity problems, chances are, right? And we'll get to the situation in which they do. 2-year-olds are like, they're babbling, like a 1-year-old is like babbling, like they don't care what people think. Like they can't even talk, they can't walk, they can't feed themselves. They can't even use the bathroom. They don't know how to wipe their ass. And like, oh my God, these little pathetic little human beings, they can't do anything. They're not alphas for sure, right? Actually, maybe they're a little bit Chad, it depends on the 1-year-old. But the truth of the matter is like kids can't do anything. Like a toddler, like they can't do anything. And yet they're supremely confident, right? Another good example of this is you can look at animals. So what is like an animal's natural state? Like if you've got a dog and like, if a dog is like pretty normal and has a normal life, like what's going to happen? They're going to be confident. They're happy. They like human beings. They're going to walk up to you. They're going to, wag their tail. They want to be petted. They want to play with you. And so if you really look at the default nature of things, it is actually, including human beings, is to be confident. And so then the question becomes, okay, well then why do people lose confidence? It's not about gaining, it's that they lose it. Well, that's because they're taught insecurity. So now let's go back to the 1-year-old or the 5-year-old or maybe you, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old. Think about high school, right? You used to be confident, and then what happened? As you hit puberty, you had particular experiences that caused you to lose confidence. You were 12 and you were like on top of the world, and then one day you walked in to school, except your water bottle was leaking in your backpack. And since your water bottle was leaking in your backpack, there was a wet stain on your bum. And then everyone laughed at you, and then suddenly you became insecure. They started making fun of you, and then your confidence went down into the pits, and now you have gained insecurity. So the reason that people can't go out and gain confidence is because confidence isn't gained, it's actually lost. This is really important to understand, and there's a ton of research to support this. If you look at people who have low self-esteem, the correlation with ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, is very, very, very high. If you look at people who have major depressive disorder, there's now a kind of forefront hypothesis that major depressive disorder is not caused by a serotonin imbalance, but is actually caused by adverse childhood experiences. We sort of know that trauma leads to a lack of self-confidence. And so if we really kind of think about it, now we can start to see why gaining confidence is so hard, because it's not about acquiring something that we don't have. It's actually about offloading something that we picked up. And so the reason it's hard to find confidence or gain confidence, we go out looking into the world, we go to this place, we go to that place, I'm going to go to this seminar, I'm going to go to this workshop, I'm going to do this kind of success gurus thing, I'm going to work with a dating coach, I'm going to read this book about finding confidence. We're going to do all these things to gain confidence. And we'll get to why some of those things can work towards the end. But we can kind of see why it doesn't work, because it's not something that's gained. It's something that you have to unlearn insecurity. So then the question kind of becomes, okay, so how do I unlearn insecurity? All we're really asking you to do is return to your baseline. You don't have to do anything special. You just have to get rid of the crap that you accumulated along the way. So this is where I think there's a very useful concept in Sanskrit called a samskar. So a samskar is like an undigested ball of emotion, or what I would kind of call like a nugget of trauma. So if we look through our life, what we tend to find is that we were confident, and there are these singular experiences that are almost these tiny nuggets of trauma that will kind of sink into our mind and change the way that we view ourselves. In cognitive behavioral therapy, this is related to something called the concept of a core belief, right? Because when you go to high school and everyone makes fun of you and then they call you wet butt or whatever, right? You get some kind of nickname that then forms a belief. And each time someone makes fun of you and calls you wet butt, then what happens is that there's another nugget of trauma that gets inserted into your mind, and another one, and another one, and another one. And so over time, what happens is these little T-nuggies grow in your mind, and they start to become something that you believe about yourself, right? Because you get all of this external input, and then you internalize those feelings. You can also see that in cases of like abusive relationships, where you have a child, even as young as 1 year old, who grows up in a household where their parents were never satisfied with them, right? So like I grew up in an Asian household, so this was really common, where like my value as a human being was always comparative. So it was like, it didn't matter that I got an A. What mattered is even if I got a 91 and that was an A, if some other kid got a 99, like why couldn't I get a 99? So this is where over time we actually start getting imbued with insecurity. And so if we want to go back to confidence, I don't think achieve confidence is the right idea. What we actually have to do is a process of unlearning. And so this is what psychotherapy is about, right? So one way to do this is you can go see a psychotherapist. And especially if you have trauma that rises to the level of like a diagnosis. And if you're not sure, does it rise to the level of a diagnosis? Like that's what a professional can help you figure out, right? You can go see a professional. They can diagnose you with a trauma-based disorder or not. But this is what we do in psychotherapy. But the cool thing is that the majority of this work actually does not get done in psychotherapy. Most human beings over the course of their life will gain some amount of confidence and like start to believe different things about themselves, right? Like we become secure in our own skin. And so what we're going to do is walk y'all through a little bit about what that process looks like. So I'd start with the question, when was the last time you were confident? Okay, because most of us, I'd say 90 to 95% of people I've worked with have been confident at some point. In the last 5 to 10%, sometimes they were actually in traumatic experiences before they can remember. So we're talking about 6 months old, 1 year old, 2 year old, but that's really the exception rather than the rule. So think about the last time you were confident and think about what happened that changed, right? So if you kind of say, oh yeah, I was confident when I was 9, but by the time I was like 13, I wasn't confident anymore. And then what you'll do is if you ask yourself what happened in the middle, chances are you've got a very powerful emotional experience somewhere in there, and you will remember it really well. And if y'all watch our interviews, you'll see that people will recall like specific things that happened to them when they were 10, when they were 11, when they were 13. And these are the formation of a samskar. This is the formation. This is the nugget of trauma that gets inserted. Now, what happens when we kind of enter into this state is that there's a pile of emotions. So the first thing is that these are usually very emotionally charged experiences. And then the second thing that happens is we don't really process those emotions, right? So if you really think about getting called wet butt because your butt was wet, the real way to process that is, hey, accidents happen sometimes. Water bottles are defective. It doesn't mean anything about me, right? Like, I'm actually not incontinent. I'm not like pathetic and, like I don't pee in my pants. This was literally the reality of it, was that a water bottle leaked. And hey, that happens sometimes. But if you really think about that child in that moment, that's not the belief that you come away with. That emotion is so powerful that it leads you to believe that you are pathetic, even though the kids were wrong, right? Like the kids weren't even right. Like you didn't even do anything wrong. And I would say that in 90% of people that I've worked with, the beliefs that they have about themselves are not actually realistic. And what do I mean by realistic? I mean that they're not based in reality. So even if you look at someone who lacks confidence and is 100% sure that they are worth nothing, that's because they had a narcissistic parent who was emotionally immature and would displace all of their anger and frustration onto the child. The child actually didn't do anything wrong, right? That's the whole point behind traumatic relationships, is that people don't deserve the way that they were treated. And so this is the real tricky thing, is that we end up accumulating these beliefs about ourselves that are from highly charged emotional situations that we carry forward with us. And we start to make conclusions. We get conditioned to believe particular things because that nugget of trauma sinks deep into our mind and then causes us to form an idea about who we are. And we carry that forward. And then what happens is we go out, we go see a dating coach, or we go do this thing, or we go do that thing to try to gain confidence. But the problem is that as long as this belief about myself deep down is in there, I can go see as many dating coaches as I want to, but like talking to 1,000 women won't kind of matter. I mean, it can matter, but as long as I don't deal with that nugget of trauma that's deep inside my mind, that samskar, the rest of that stuff is like kind of barking at up the wrong tree. So what we really need to do is go back and re-examine those experiences, right? And recontextualize them. Think a little bit about how I felt in that moment. And this is the other really tricky thing about these experiences, is that the more powerful the emotion is, the more it sinks in. But the really tricky thing is that the more powerful the emotion is, the more incorrect our conclusion about ourselves will be. Because we didn't form a judgment about ourselves based on careful thought and consideration from a calm mind. Right? We're very, very emotional. So the deeper it sinks, the wronger it is. And this is the problem with a samskar. And this is why you can go look for confidence outside in the world as much as you want to. But as long as you're carrying that nugget of trauma around, it's going to be really hard to find confidence. And so what do we do with this nugget of trauma? So we go into a lot more detail in, for example, Dr. K's guide or our coaching program. This is what our coaches are kind of really good at, is that they're good at sort of helping people dig back and understand where they formed their beliefs about themselves, and then like use that understanding to actually engage in positive behaviors moving forward. They really focus on that latter part. And if you've really been kind of traumatized, I'd highly recommend you see a therapist. But if you're really focused on, I have some belief about myself, or I have something internal that holds me back from moving forward, then coaching may be a better fit. But even today, we're going to talk y'all through the basic theory that we share with our coaches and that we sort of use in this community and is in Dr. K's guide. So you kind of think about that experience, and then you kind of analyze it, right? So what did you feel in that moment? What were the beliefs that you formed about yourself? And now this is the key thing. Looking back on it now, what were some more appropriate conclusions that you could have drawn? And as you kind of do that, you'll start to realize, oh my God, actually, it wasn't my fault that people called me pathetic. I actually didn't even do anything wrong. And then a couple of things will happen. The first is that you're going to feel like really, really sad and feel a ton of grief. And you got to be ready for that. Because what that means is that for the last 10 years of your life, you've been carrying around a belief about yourself that isn't even true. And you've suffered so much, even though you didn't deserve it. And that in and of itself can hurt a lot. And when we start working with some scars or these nuggets of trauma, we can have those kinds of experiences. So let that grief come. And if you want to, if you can, let yourself cry. Because here's the beautiful thing. When you cry, that's our physiologic way of processing that emotion. And the more that we cry, actually, this is beautiful, the less powerful that belief becomes. And the more we will actually get closer to confidence. You don't necessarily need to cry, but if whatever emotions come up as you kind of re-examine that stuff, just let them come up, right? And sit with it. And then we're going to move on to the next part, which is really, really important, which is what we want to do next is now as you start to move forward in life, as you try to engage in particular behaviors, what's going to happen is that nugget of trauma is going to surface. The samskar will surface. And as you go to a party, there'll be a little voice in your head that says, hey, you're not worth being friends with. Hey, people don't like you. This is a lesson that you learned, and that's what a lack of confidence looks like, right? It manifests in the moment and tells you something about yourself. It says, hey, these other people can do this, but you can't because they are this way and you are this way. And so what you'll see is these lessons that you learned early in life will manifest in your mind and will prevent you from actually acting. And then you can struggle with that lack of confidence. Sometimes you can overcome it, sometimes you can't, right? That's the experience of it. So the next thing that we need to do is when that lack of confidence surfaces, we need to pause. Don't fight it, don't overcome it, don't conquer it. Just sit with it and say, hey, okay, hold on a second. Here's that lack of confidence. Here's that feeling, and this is what, if you pay attention, this is what it's going to be. The feeling that you feel in that moment is going to be an echo of what you felt that day that you walked into school. It'll be an image, an echo, a mirror. It'll be like a little piece of that. It's that emotional energy that is unprocessed and stored in your mind. And as it's unprocessed and stored in your mind, it'll come up again. And now what you need to do is realize, hey, hold on a second. What my mind is telling me in this moment isn't actually true. This is just the echo from the trauma of the past. This is the conclusion that I learned from this inappropriate kind of scenario, right? So it's an inappropriate conclusion. And as you notice it in the moment, it takes practice, but hopefully what will start to happen is its power over you will lessen. As you notice it, you'll, oh, hold on a second. It's not that I'm actually not worth being friends with. This is just the echo from the past that made me believe that I'm not worth being friends with. Then you kind of acknowledge it in the moment. You can kind of ask yourself, hey, in this moment, like, can I set this belief about myself aside? Can I actually try to enjoy the time that I'm about to spend with these people? And even that noticing in the moment also leads to digestion of that emotion. And so if you do these two things, if you kind of like process the emotion kind of sitting by yourself in your room, whatever, or if you catch it in the act and acknowledge it for what it is, if you see it, it'll start to diminish. And the beautiful thing is, as you do this over and over and over again, that nugget of trauma will start to get digested. And as the nugget of trauma starts to get digested, you will naturally feel confident. You didn't actually have to go out and gain it. All you have to do is just be yourself. You're going to feel free. You're going to feel normal. You're going to feel natural. And that's when confidence comes back. Now, one last thing that I kind of want to touch on is, but what about all these people who will say, go out and build confidence? So usually what happens in those situations is as you go out into those scenarios, that emotion will come up once again. And in the process of engaging with that emotion in the present, you can actually get some amount of digestion there as well. The reason that I prefer this methodology, and the reason that, for example, in our coaching program, we don't actually advocate that, people go out there and like re-traumatize themselves over and over and over again. Because that's the problem with just going out there, right? Is that if you're lucky, those feelings will come up, you'll recognize them, you'll grow through it. You can absolutely do that, right? You can realize, that these people aren't rejecting me for me. They're rejecting me because they have their own problems. Some people go down that route. The problem with just going out there is that sometimes it actually enhances the trauma even more. And I've seen this, for example, with like bad parenting where like someone has a phobia of dogs. So I'm going to take my kid and I'm going to dump him in a pen with a dog and they'll overcome the fear, right? And sometimes that works in terms of overcoming the fear, and sometimes it traumatizes people. That's why we much prefer this method, because the real battle is like internal, right? You don't actually have to re-traumatize yourself in order to overcome the trauma. You can actually confront those inner demons And you want to expose yourself a little bit, right? So you want to go into those situations where the samskara is evoked, and then you can kind of like notice it, but you don't need to like hardcore re-traumatize yourself to overcome your trauma. Because for some people that works really well if they're resilient enough, and for other people it just cripples them worse. So I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but the truth of the matter is that the reason that it's hard to gain confidence, and the reason that going out there and gaining confidence works for some people and is traumatic for others, is because you can't really gain it. All you can do is lose it. And if you want to go back to being confident, it's not about going out there and finding it. It's about actually unlearning the insecurity. And that is done through sort of digesting a samskar or sort of processing this nugget of trauma.